Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Repeateron, and today we're going to be doing another Deep Rock Galactic tier list. This is actually going to be an updated list for all the perks in the game as of 2022. This is a few months after the new primaries came out. Some of the primaries did sort of indirectly buff or get a buff from the perks that we have here, and we'll be going over all of them and discussing them. I have the tiers set up right here. The tiers, I didn't even bother with a D tier this time, just S, A, B, or C. C is kind of like the average ones. They're not bad. They'll work on pretty much any build, but maybe they're not as strong as I would like them to be. B tier, pretty solid perks. A tier, good. Nothing wrong with them. S tier, probably the best perks. This is all based on my own opinion, though, too. I would recommend trying out all of the active and all the passive perks on each of the classes and see what you like, especially with each of the weapons. Unless you obviously know they're not going to work, like taking the cryo cannon and the UPC with Born Ready because they don't reload. That one's kind of a no-brainer, but let's talk about each of these. I'm going to be talking about the active perks first, then we're going to be talking about the passive perks, kind of what they do, and if there's any upside or downside to each of them. So our very first active perk is Beastmaster, and Beastmaster is a pretty good one. This one lets you tame a grunt, which becomes a Steve that will fight for you. Now, pretty much every class can get use out of a Steve. There isn't really a class that doesn't want a Steve because you might kill him easy or something like that. Steve actually takes very much reduced friendly fire damage. He takes, I think, only 2% of friendly fire damage, and he's immune to things like the corrosive sludge, and he's immune to the flames from the flamethrower, so you don't have to worry about him running across those. He can still be frozen by things like the cryo cannon. He can still be lit on fire with the flamethrower if you hold it on him. But even so, he's not going to take as much damage as he normally would. You can use this on regular grunts, slashers, and guards. Usually you want to go for either a guard or a slasher. Slashers will do the most amount of damage, and they have the slowdown debuff that they can hit other enemies with, which is nice. And then the guards are just the tankiest. Whenever you get a Steve, they'll get their health all the way back up to full, but they won't regen any sort of armor. They can have regenerative health on the regenerative bugs, but that's the only way he's going to regenerate. And if you have a Steve on like the Parasite mission, if Steve dies, he will still spawn a Parasite, but it will not fight for you. Steve's Parasites are still very much against you, even if Steve was your teammate. Some people have found Steve to be a little bit annoying, and I can kind of see that too, because sometimes he does get in the way of objectives, sometimes he gets in the way of resupply pods, so there is a little bit of annoyance there, but even so, Steve is still pretty useful by himself. He usually kills quite a few of the bugs, and Grunt or a guard or a slasher can usually 1v1 a Praetorian, which is pretty nice. And you do need to get pretty close to this. So this isn't the best to be using like in the middle of a wave fight or something. You want to wait until there's like one grunt left, or you want to do it before a wave even starts. Sometimes it's best just to grab a regular grunt beforehand, because you might not get an opportunity, at least on the higher difficulties, to get a Steve. That being said, I still really like Beastmaster. I think it pairs really well with pretty much every class, and I still would probably put it up into A tier. I think it's a pretty solid active perk. It's one that I take a lot on Engineer. I really like it for that, because you have like the Steve, you have the turrets, you can have proximity mines if you really want to have a lot of defense. You could also pair this with like plasma bursters or lures or anything like that. Lures also help because then nothing's attacking Steve and Steve might go and kill them, but it can pair really well with like Scout, Gunner, Driller, anybody. I don't think it's ever going to really be a bad choice to have a Steve. Our next active perk is Berserker, and Berserker lets you go Berserk for a little bit. So if you have already used your power attack from your pickaxe and then you use it again, then you start to activate Berserk. Berserk has a 4-minute cooldown at its highest, so it does take a little while to come back. But for the next 10 seconds, you have pretty much unlimited power attacks that do very high damage. The power attacks from the pickaxe are great. This also synergizes really well with the passive perk Vampire if you want to take it with that. You can also use this to mine surprisingly fast too if you need to get out of a situation really quick. Like if you're very close to the escape pod, but there's a dirt wall or something in your way, you can use Berserker to actually get through the dirt wall in a pretty fast manner. You can also accidentally activate Berserk. I've done that a couple times when I've taken this. I might be trying to hit an Ebonut or something like that, or maybe I'm just using power attacks to kill loot bugs, and I accidentally use Berserker, so you kind of have to be aware of when you're using it. Berserker pairs really well with a few classes. It can work on really any of them, though, but I find that it pairs really well with Scout, and it pairs really well with Driller. Driller because melee works the best with Driller, and you're most likely to be taking like Vampire with it, so it kind of makes sense to take it there. With Scout, it can also work because you have the highest amount of mobility, so just going around and hitting everything with your pickaxe attacks or focusing down one big enemy really fast with the pickaxe attacks makes a lot of sense to take Berserker. There's nothing that's really insane about Berserker, I would say, but it is just a solid perk. It's similar to like Beastmaster. I would also put this into A tier. I'm not sure if I'd put it above or below Beastmaster. I'd take it less than Beastmaster, but on classes like Berserker or classes like Scout and Driller, it can be really good. It can also be pretty good on Engineer and Gunner too. Dash is probably one of the best perks in the game because it works really well on every class, except for Scout it doesn't work as well on. You can still use it on Scout and you can still get a lot of value out of it, but just for kiting on like the higher levels, it's so nice to have this. It also removes all slows when you're moving, when you activate Dash. So you can ignore anything like stuns, electricity, goo, anything like that. This also has a very low cooldown at only 25 seconds. So you'll be able to use it pretty often. This does not stack though, I found, with something like Momentum from the Scout. The main reason why it's not super useful on Scout is because you have the Grappling Hook. Grappling Hook can get you around places very easily, similar to Dash. And if you're taking Momentum with it, you essentially get Dash on top of it. I think at a slightly shorter duration though. But I mean, you do have the full length of the grappling hook to go. So it's not really necessary there. But I love running this on Driller. I love running this on Engineer. I love running this on Gunner because you can reposition very easily. You can really kite around. And I find it to just be super useful most of the time. So I'd put this one up into S tier. Unless, of course, you're playing it on Scout. On Scout, I would probably say it's like A or B tier, depending on what you're building. You can still make it work, but it's not going to be as crazy on them as it is on the other classes. Our next active perk is Field Medic. Field Medic is great. Field Medic makes it so you revive teammates 30% faster than you normally would, which is great. This also stacks when you have multiple people using Field Medic to res somebody. So that's just a passive. It has the active skill of you being able to, once per mission, insta-res somebody. This is really useful, especially on the higher difficulties. It's not uncommon for somebody to go down in a bad position. And if you can res them, that's great, especially if you can res somebody like the Gunner who can set up a shield and res multiple people. It's always nice to have Field Medic on there, especially in multiplayer. In solo, of course, Field Medic is not really useful at all because you're just by yourself. And in that case, you're really never going to use it. But in multiplayer, it's never going to be a bad option on any of the classes. I would say that it's best on Gunner and on Scout. Simply because you can res quickly as Gunner and you can res pretty safely with the shield. But even if you don't have your shield, you can still res somebody fairly fast and without too much trouble. And if multiple people went down in the same location and maybe you're not going with the full time extension shield, you can still just throw the shield down, res everybody, and be relatively safe. It's good on Scout because you have the highest amount of mobility, so it's easy for you to get to somebody to res them very quick. I would put this one up into S tier. Then we have Heightened Senses, which Heightened Senses is great. Heightened Senses makes it so twice per mission, at least when it's fully leveled up, you can insta-kill anything that grabs you. So this could be a trawler, this could be a leech, or a grabber. I think those are the only things that can grab you right now. Anyway, if any of those grab you, you can just hit space, or I think it's A or X on controller, and you'll be able to break free from the grasp of that, and you'll kill whatever grabbed you. So you can insta-kill leeches, you can insta-kill trawlers and grabbers. This one I run pretty much all the time on Scout, and I would say it's probably S tier on Scout because Scout has the most mobility, so you're most likely to be separated from the group the most out of anybody. Usually on higher difficulties, everybody kind of stays closer together, but even so, it's not uncommon for Scout to go off on their own looking for more like materials, going for more nitro or whatever it might be, trying to get the objective done a little bit quicker or going for side objectives. And it's really bad when you get grabbed by a leech because that can easily kill you since you can't fight back. With this, it lets you fight back. It also gives you a heads up that there are leeches, grabbers, and trawlers in the area. Usually you don't need that with things like the trawlers and the grabbers because the grabbers scream out and you'll be able to hear them and you'll be looking for trawlers if you're in the sandblast caverns. Leeches, on the other hand, you're never really sure if they're nearby. You can hear them when they're trying to grab you, but sometimes it's difficult to hear them, especially if you're shooting at other bugs. So I don't think there's going to be a bad time to take Heightened Senses on any class. It's great in solo. It's very, very useful in solo because Bosco's not always going to immediately go for you and save you. So I think I put this one down into like C tier before or something like that, which I don't think it is. I think this one's probably A tier, maybe S tier on Scout, probably A tier on everybody else. All right, up next is Hover Boots, which hover boots lets you pretty much not take a fall. You can technically use the hover boots as weapons, but I have rarely ever seen anybody do that. I'm pretty sure a lot of people don't even know that you can use hover boots as a weapon. This lets you activate this when you're falling, and then you will hover, resetting your fall. You can hover for up to 3.5 seconds, and you'll also burn any creatures that are directly below you. Now, you have to be pretty close to them to actually burn them. It's not going to let you burn them from like 10 meters away or something. So that's why I don't think a lot of people realize that hover boots actually can work as a weapon. And this does have a long cooldown on it, up to 75 seconds. Hover boots is really good for anybody starting out, I would say. Especially on classes who you fall quite a bit on. Scout in particular, it's really good on, especially if you're new and you don't have any overclocks. If you have things like hover clock and special powder, especially if you're using them, then hover boots is not necessary at all, so it becomes less necessary later on. Can be really good on Gunner if you find yourself falling off your zip line pretty often, which can happen. You can get knocked off of it by flying enemies or ranged enemies, or maybe you get hit by a stabber vine or something. So that can save you from falls. It can also be useful on Driller because when you're drilling, you may just enter into an area where you're just falling down a hole. That's happened to me plenty of times before. The one class that doesn't really help too much on is Engineer. Yeah, it can help you if you just want to jump down a hole and be down there quicker, rather than like using your platforms, but it's not too common for Engineer to be falling off of like their platforms or something, at least too often compared to the other classes. It can still help them. I would say if you're just starting, definitely try out hover boots. It's going to help you out a lot. You're not going to fall down and die as much, which that's the most common way that people do die in this game. The devs have even confirmed that, where gravity kills the most people. Hover boots, I think early on, I'm going to put it into B tier, I think, because I don't think it's going to be a bad choice on anybody. I'm going to be less of a useful choice on Engineer. Maybe it is C tier for Engineer. For like Driller and Gunner, I think it's maybe B tier. Then Scout, it's probably like A or S tier, assuming you don't have Hover Clock or Special Powder as overclocks. Up next, we have Iron Will. Iron Will is a really useful perk. It's good to have one person run Iron Will on your team. So this one makes it so when you go down, at any point you can activate this to pick yourself back up, and you can stay up for a total of 12 seconds at the highest level of this. During Iron Will, though, you are immune to all damage, nothing can hit you. All your weapons are reloaded upon entering Iron Will. You get 20% bonus movement speed, more so than usual, and you get 2.5 times pickaxe damage for the duration of this. That does not apply to the power attacks, though. You also get 30% slowdown reduction, so slows don't affect you as much. And your power attack cooldown is divided by 3. So normally it would be 30 seconds, divided by 3 would be 10 seconds. So you might be able to use it twice during the duration. If you have better weight balance, then you might be able to use it 3, maybe 4 times. You can also pick yourself up with Iron Will and stay up if you get red sugar, or if you have the perk Vampire and you kill something, or if you get a resupply during the time that you use it. This is really good for if everybody goes down in a mission and you want to res them. So yeah, it's always going to be good to have somebody with Iron Will. Not the whole team needs to take Iron Will, though. You can if you really want to. That can be really useful. And Iron Will's not really going to be bad on any class. The classes I would say it's the best on, though, are Gunner and Scout. Once again, similar to Field Medic, simply because Gunner can potentially res people, then throw down a shield and people can res them again. So you're safe with the rezzing. You can also do it with Scout because Scout has the most mobility, so you're most likely to be able to get to a red sugar to get health back, or get to a resupply quickly, or res somebody fast, or a combination of these. And it can be good on like Driller too, because you're likely running Vampire. So anything that's a melee hit, like your pickaxes or your impact axes, your drills, can just pick you right up from there, since you can't take damage during the duration of this. So I'd put Iron Will high up into A tier, or maybe at the bottom of S tier. I think I'll put it at the bottom of S tier. I think I put it in A tier before, but it's really handy to have somebody with Iron Will. It's so useful. I don't necessarily know. I wouldn't say it's probably better than Field Medic or Dash in most situations. But when there are the really bad situations, Iron Will can definitely come in clutch. Next up, we have the active perk, See You in Hell. This one is a super fun perk to use, although not always the best. This one is kind of a two-part one. Its passive ability that you get is right after an enemy hits you. your melee attacks are increased with temporary melee damage buff. This gives you 20 more melee damage, but this is only on regular pickaxe hits. This doesn't buff your drills, it doesn't buff your power attack, and it doesn't buff the impact axes. So it's only for the pickaxe attack, which can synergize pretty well with something like Vampire if you want to take it for that, especially on the lower difficulties where enemies aren't going to be breaking your shield with one hit or anything like that. So it's pretty useful there. This also lets you explode 3 times during a mission once you go down. So you have to go down, and then you have a button that you can activate that then blows up everything around you and deals a lot of damage. It does 666 damage, of course. But this doesn't do any friendly fire damage whatsoever. So it is pretty nice. It only hurts the enemies around you. You can use it up to 3 times, but you do have to go down for that. That's not a big deal if you have teammates that are pretty good or pretty vigilant of what's going on, especially if they know what you're doing. And like I said, this can synergize pretty well with a melee build. It works really well on Driller. On everybody else, it's okay. It's always going to be fun to take. So on Driller, it's probably like high B, low A. On everybody else, I'm going to say it's like lowish B. You don't see it that often, but it pops up every once in a while. All right, then we have Shield Link, which Shield Link is actually pretty useful, especially with some of the new weapons that we got, or at least the new overclocks. Like the shield battery for the drag. Shield Link actually buffs that particular overclock pretty well. I like it with that one. Even without it, it's still a good multiplayer perk to take. This one has the passive of whenever you're within 4 meters of another teammate, doesn't matter if you are with multiple teammates or just one teammate, then both you and the other teammate regen your shield 50% faster. That's really good. Like I said, it's really good with the shield battery booster because you want to be at full shields for that one. So getting your shield up quicker makes a lot of sense. And just in general, having a larger or having a faster shield is going to be more useful throughout the mission. Its active is that you overcharge your teammate's shield up to 300%. This lasts up to 30 seconds, and this has a 2-minute cooldown on it. So it can be pretty useful because you can be activating it pretty often, and 300% more shield. I think if you're taking full shield, you get 30, so it would go up to 90, which 90 shield is pretty nice. That means even on the highest difficulty, you can tank through some serious hits. It will let you actually survive certain things. Like, I think it lets you survive a detonator on anybody blowing up directly on you. Not just somebody like Gunner who can survive it because they have the passive explosion resistance. Outside of multiplayer though, Shield Link is completely useless. This doesn't affect Bosco or Molly, so you don't get a faster shield regen, and you can't throw your shield on like Molly or Bosco or anything like that. Shield Link is okay. I don't really have a problem with it, but I don't think it's as strong as some of the other active perks. I would probably put this one into B tier as well. I think this is where I put all the active perks. Kind of made a nice little grid here. Didn't really mean to do that. Didn't think it would turn out that way, but that's how it works. Let's talk about the passive perks now. So our very first passive perk starts out really strong. This is Born Ready. This makes it so when you unequip your weapon, after 5 seconds, that weapon is reloaded, which can be really useful. It's really useful on most classes, not necessarily with all builds, but most classes can use this. Driller's the only one that doesn't get as much benefit out of it as the other classes do. It's really good on Gunner because unless you're taking the minigun. It's not so great if you want to take the minigun Gunner, then you're just reloading your secondary, which both the burst pistol and the revolver reload pretty quick. It can be said that it's useful for not having as much downtime, which is true. That's true on every class unless your weapons just don't reload. So like minigun Gunner, it's okay on. You'll reload your zipline gun and your secondary. Autocannon it's really good on because autocannon just has a very long reload. Even with reload canceling, the autocannon still has a pretty long reload. Same with the Hurricane, has a decently long reload. So it's really good with them. The only one that it doesn't really work for, like I said, is a minigun. For Engineer, it works for all builds because every weapon of the Engineers needs to be reloaded, and both their secondaries can take a while depending on overclocks or builds for them. It can work pretty well on Driller, unless of course you're running the EPC and the Cryo Cannon, because then it's kind of a wasted perk at that point since neither weapon needs to reload. But reloading the Flamethrower can be useful. Reloading the Sabata can be a little bit useful. The Sabata reloads pretty quick. It can be pretty useful though with the new Corrosive Sludge Pump, so Driller does have more of a reason to take Born Ready. And it's always going to be good on Scout because it's just nice to have the Flare Gun reloaded. Although you can go with the Flare Gun Tier 3, I think, that reloads it automatically. The Boomstick that reloads it automatically. and then take something like the Drac, and you have Born Ready essentially on your whole build, so you wouldn't need it there. It's always going to be useful on pretty much every class, not on every build though. So this is going to vary a lot from build to build. On some of the builds, I would say it's definitely S tier. On some of the builds, I'd say it's probably like A tier. And then, of course, there'd be some builds there where you just don't get very much value, if any value at all. So I think I'm going to put this one up on the low end of S tier. I don't think there's going to be really a bad time to take this unless, of course, like I said, you're taking like the Cryo Cannon and the EPC with Driller, because there's just no point in taking it then. Then our next passive perk is Deep Pockets. Deep Pockets gives you up to 15 more valuables that you can hold. So this would be like Nitra, gold, even things like mushrooms. I doubt you're going to hit the cap on that. And that's all it does. It's a pretty handy passive perk to have. It's better than nothing. There's always a case to be made there that it is better than nothing. It's not entirely necessary on every class, though. I don't find it to be incredibly useful on people like Gunner and Engineer. I find it most useful on Driller and Scout. Scout is just so handy to have so that you don't have to be going back and forth as much. Driller, kind of the same thing, especially if you're doing like the C4 mining, the EPC mining. You're getting a lot of materials really quick, and you just want to keep going and collecting everything and then drop everything off at once. It's always going to be nice to have, but it's never going to be like a necessity or anything. So I think I'm going to put this one into B tier, even though I can understand arguments for it being lower or arguments for it being much higher. It really just depends on how much of an inconvenience is it for you to hold extra materials or not hold them. And that's kind of going to be a personal question as to how much you enjoy it. Up next is Elemental Insulation. This is another perk that's never really going to be a bad option to take on anybody, because this gives you 30% more resistance towards elemental damage. Elemental damage includes fire, electricity, poison, radiation, heat, or cold. This doesn't give you any resistance towards melee, explosive, or kinetic damage. So this one can work against certain things well. It's pretty useful to take if you want to take it to any of the biomes where you're taking extra damage from these things. So if you're going to like Magma Core, if you're going to the Fungus Bog, where you're going to be taking like poison damage or fire damage. If you're going any place where you might get electricity damage. It does work against other things like the Praetorian's gas, the Praetorian spit, radioactive grunts in general, or I guess radioactive attacks in general, like in the radioactive zone and against the crystals and stuff. It works partially against certain things like the acid spitter's spit or the damage over time effect of it, but not the actual spit hit. So you're still going to be taking a lot of damage there. It also technically sort of works against bulk detonators, but only the fire damage, not the explosion damage. So you'll take less damage if you survive the explosion. I used to say this one was like S tier, but I don't really take it all that much anymore. I still think it's good. I still don't think there's going to be a bad time to take it. It can definitely be better depending on the build that you're running. Like if you're running Fat Boy on the grenade launcher for Engineer, where you can potentially hurt yourself with your own radiation, this one might be an option. I don't know if any of the new weapons really benefit from this. I don't think it counts towards like your own friendly fire damage of the sludge pump. And I can't really think of you hurting yourself with the other weapons. So I'm going to say probably not. This doesn't work on like robot lasers either. It's not like you just take less damage from them. You still take the same amount. Although I guess you technically would take less electricity damage from like the Caretaker's electricity. So if you wanted to run across there, it wouldn't be a bad option. I think I'm going to put this one into A tier. Up next we have Friendly, which in its description, through the power of friendship, you both take and deal 50% less friendly fire damage. So you don't hurt your allies as much and they don't hurt you as much. On certain builds, you could argue that Friendly is pretty much a necessity, like on Fat Boy with the Engineer, because you can definitely kill your teammates with that. Potentially with like the Breach Cutter too, if you're running Spinning Death or Return to Sender, it might be a really good option to run it. Friendly fire damage is not a direct one-to-one comparison. It's not like the damage that you see or the damage that you're dealing to grunts is going to equate to the same amount of damage that you're dealing to allies. It depends on the hazard difficulty that you're playing on. For each hazard difficulty up to hazard 4, it's an increase of 10%. So at hazard 1, it would be 10%, and at hazard 4, it would be 40% friendly fire damage. Once you get to hazard 5, though, it jumps up to 70% friendly fire damage. So you are doing more there. So cutting that in half is pretty useful. Like I said, with some of those weapons, it's very useful. If you're playing on the lower difficulties, this one still can be useful. It's great if you want to be running this with like new friends or anything like that, or running it with maybe newer players that might be hitting you, or maybe everybody's running like blow through rounds or something. It can be really useful then. And it's never going to be a bad option either, because friendly fire damage happens all the time on every difficulty. It's not uncommon for me to take friendly fire damage or somebody else to take friendly fire damage. It's not a bad idea to take this on Driller either. If you're kind of new with the C4, you might be blowing your teammates up. This one's one that could go anywhere, I would say, depending on who you ask. I'm going to put it into C tier because I feel like it's something that you can kind of work around. All right, up next, It's a Bug Thing. With It's a Bug Thing, when you stand within 5 meters of a loot bug, it will explode. This one, even the developer said that this is kind of a meme perk, but even though I've been trying it out recently, it's still okay, honestly. It's better than nothing, but not by a whole lot. I'd probably still rather have any of the other passive perks over It's a Bug Thing in most situations. But this one, it still has some value, especially on missions like the oil rig mission, where you might be running around and there might be just a whole bunch of little loot bugs around. It can be pretty useful on Scout too, because you have the high amount of mobility. So just using your grappling hook, especially if you're combining this with, again, hover clock and special powder, then you can fly around the map, pop all the loot bugs without having to hit them or anything like that. It does save ammo. It does save a little bit of time. It's by no means necessary though. You could also say that it has the very big downside that you can't pet the loot bugs anymore, which, I mean, that's just a travesty too. So this one's going to be the lowest end of our perk list, I think. All right, up next we got Resupplier, and I've really been liking this one recently. At the highest level, Resupplier lets you collect resupplies 50% faster, as well as you get 25% increase in health from the resupply, and all of your weapons are instantly reloaded. This includes all the weapons that you have holstered and everything too. Or if your weapon's empty when you're grabbing it. It also counts for equipment, I believe, too, like the shield. So this one is really useful. I really like it. It gets you a lot of value. You get even more health value from the resupply crates. There's plenty of times, especially if you don't want to take breathing room on your suit, where this can actually save you. Like if you get res and you have that 3 seconds to where you can't go down again, you can usually grab a resupply within those 3 seconds, assuming you're close enough to the pod. Even with breathing room, this is still nice because you can grab it and then get somewhere else, or throw down a shield or do something else. So I don't think resupply is ever going to be a bad choice on any of the classes. I think it's actually a really solid choice now. I don't know if I would put it S tier. It feels really good, but it feels like a nice bonus, where I feel like Born Ready is a little bit stronger. I'm going to put this one in the high end of A tier. I'm going to kind of keep the passive perks together and the active perks together, but I would say this is a high A tier, maybe low S tier. We might move it around by the end of the video, because this one, it feels really good. Our next passive perk is Second Wind. This one makes it so after 4 seconds of sprinting, you get 12% more movement speed. That's kind of useful. It's not as strong in the higher difficulties. Like, it's not going to be as good as Dash, because even with the 12% bonus movement speed, enemies still can catch up to you on Hazard 5. So it's not as useful there. On lower difficulties, it's more useful, I would say. And it's never going to be a bad thing, because just moving through the map a little bit quicker is always going to be nice. There's not a whole lot to say about this one. I kind of wish that this one would get buffed, but I'm not entirely sure how it would be buffed. Maybe if it was combined with one of the other perks here, like maybe if it was combined with Friendly or Strong Arm or Unstoppable, maybe Veteran Depositor. These other perks, I feel like they need a little bit more of a buff. I think this is one of them. And I think if you just combined these perks together, or gave it a little bit something extra, maybe not even movement speed, or maybe just faster walk speed, even when you're not sprinting or something like that, even if it's only by like 5%, I feel like that would make it a little bit nicer. I'm going to put this one in C tier. I guess I'd put it up there, because it still can be useful, and I do run it occasionally on like Engineer. Sometimes I run it on Scout if I just want to move a little bit quicker. All right, next active perk, Strong Arm. Strong Arm makes it so you throw flares 50% further than you normally would, and you can also throw heavy objects 20% further than you normally would. So any of the missions where you got to do that, including like the salvage missions where you got to throw the legs, or the point extract missions where you got to get the crystals. This one actually isn't that bad either, because if you don't have a scout in the group, This can be pretty useful for looking at the ceiling to see if there's any like leeches or anything like that. Sometimes I take this on like Gunner. Sometimes I take this on Driller. It's not really a bad option. I wouldn't really take this on Scout because you have the flare gun anyway, so it's less necessary on them. Engineer, you may not take it either because the turrets can usually scout ahead for you if you're setting them up whenever you're moving into like a new area. But the other two, they can be kind of useful. This is another perk that I feel should get maybe a buff or get combined with some of these. Like maybe combine this with Second Wind and just put them into one perk, or combine it with part of Unstoppable or Veteran Depositor. It's, like I said, it does have use, but I feel like I'd put Strong Arm probably also into C tier. Then we've got Sweet Tooth. Sweet Tooth is pretty useful too. It's got a very simple buff where whenever you get red sugar, you get more health, up to 30% more health, and at the highest rank, you get 20% bonus movement speed for 10 seconds. That's pretty useful, especially if you combine this with Iron Will. You can actually get a lot of extra movement speed to run around and potentially res people after you've picked yourself up. It lets you get a little bit more value out of the red sugar around the map. So this one's not going to be a bad choice on anybody either, I don't think. I don't take it as often as I used to. I feel like I get a little bit more value out of Resupplier just because I don't find myself taking tons of damage. And usually with Resupplier, you're almost up to full health when you do resupply, even if you've been beat up quite a bit. Where Sweet Tooth kind of depends on the map. Sometimes you just get unlucky and red sugar just doesn't spawn in great places. Sometimes it's on the ceiling or in weird, awkward locations where it's like hidden behind a bunch of stuff and you just don't want to bother even going over there because you might just get trapped in there by bugs or something. So I feel like it's less useful than Resupplier now. That being said, though, I still think I'd put this up into A tier. Because, like, it's still good resource management. All right, up next we got Thorns, and I really like Thorns. Thorns is super useful. Thorns makes it so when an enemy hits you, it takes damage in return. Up to 24 damage per hit, which is really nice. That's definitely enough to kill things like Swarmers, and it's enough to take a decent amount of health out of Grunts. It can be really useful just to have on pretty much every class, and I run it on pretty much every class. Maybe not with every build, but pretty much every class I run this on. Now, an important thing to note about Thorns is that it can't trigger on every single hit. There is a little bit of a cooldown in between hits, so if a bunch of Swarmers hit you all at once, it won't kill all of them or anything like that. It will only kill technically the first one that hits you, then it needs to reset to hit and kill some more. This one is just such a handy passive perk in my opinion, though. There's never going to be a bad time to take it. It works really well with melee builds. It works really well with ranged builds. I feel like I would probably also put this one up into S tier on the lower end. You don't need it with every class, especially with like Gunner and Driller, especially if you're taking like Sticky Flames or you're taking Face Melter or you're taking like the extra long Flame Stream. Those things just deal with all the small stuff so easily that you don't really need Thorns with them, but it's still just really nice to have. It's also kind of funny that Thorns works on anything that hits you, including like those little cactuses that you step on. So I guess there's that too for it. All right, then we have Unstoppable. Unstoppable makes it so elemental or environmental slowdown effects are reduced by up to 50%. You also move faster while carrying heavy objects. The faster when moving heavy objects is kind of nice, especially if you already have like backbreakers, then you move surprisingly fast with this, so you don't necessarily need that. Mostly you're taking this for the elemental slowdown resist. It pairs really well with the Scout. I really like running Unstoppable on Scout. On everybody else, it really depends on the biome that we're going in. In the frozen area, it can be really good. In the fungus bog, it can be really good. Outside of those, though, you're not really running into things that are slowing you down a whole lot. There is a couple other things that this affects too. It infects spider webs, goo, heavy snow, storms, earthquakes, and the Frost Praetorian's Frost Spray. So you do get more value out of this with certain environments, and other environments you don't really get much. If you're going to the Azure Weld, Unstoppable probably isn't going to help you a whole lot unless you're doing like a salvage mission or something. It's going to help you a little bit. It's an okay perk. I feel like this one should probably be combined with something like Second Wind, and then it would probably be a whole lot better. Or maybe combine it with Strong Arm or something, or maybe kind of just combine these three perks into one perk, or maybe make them separate into like two perks but take parts of them. I feel like that would be a good idea and probably boost this one up. Right now I'm going to put it into the low end of B tier. But, like I said, I use it on Scout pretty often. On every other class, depends if I'm going to the area. Then we have Vampire. which Vampire is kind of still a perk that I feel some people overvalue how good it is. It can be good if you're playing safe, but that's difficult to do on the high difficulties. And it can be good on certain classes, definitely on Driller. On Driller, I would say the Vampire is probably S tier. On everybody else, I'm thinking that it's a little bit less than that. So whenever you kill a medium-sized enemy or larger with a melee attack, then you get up to 5 health back. That can be really good. Like I said, if you combine this with Berserker, it's really good. If you combine this with Iron Will, it's really good. If you combine all 3 of those together, then it can be really strong, or like See You in Hell or Thorns with this. All of those can work quite well in combination with Vampire. It's also really good on the Driller because your impact axes and your drills also count as melee, so you get more value out of it there. It can also be really good on Scout if you want to run Berserker with it. If you're not running Berserker on it and you're not running it on Driller, then honestly, Vampire is pretty lackluster. I would say Sweet Tooth or Resupplier is a far better use of getting health, simply because you're likely risking more health to get your health from the enemies than it's really worth. Slowdown effects really help with Vampire too, so that's also why Driller gets so much use out of this, because all of their primary weapons slow enemies down pretty substantially in some cases, sometimes freeze them solid, so you can kill them very easily then with your drills or with your axes. So Vampire, I would say, is probably, realistically, I think it's probably B tier if it's not combined with other perks to make it stronger. If you have Berserker and you have Iron Will, or maybe you just have Iron Will, it's probably like A tier. If you have Berserker, it's still probably A tier, but higher up. If you combine them both, I would still probably say it's A tier. And if you're on Driller, then it is probably S tier. Without that, I think it is probably B tier. I guess I'll put it A tier for right now, just because I'm assuming that you're running Berserker with this. I'm assuming that you might be running Iron Will with this. In which case, yeah, you can pick yourself up with Iron Will, power attack something, go res somebody, and you will have picked yourself up from this. You will res somebody, you could potentially res another person, or get to a better location to fight, or whatever it might be. And then our last passive perk is Veteran Depositor. This makes it so you deposit 50% faster at the highest rank, and you also get 30% damage reduction whenever you're standing within 7 meters of a deposit point. So this counts as Molly. This also counts towards any of the rigs that you got to put up, like the oil rig or the point extract rig. It can also count towards your ship too, but this doesn't count towards mini mules because you can't just drop them into the mini mules. This one can be pretty good, especially if you combine it with certain other things. Like, it's really strong with the tier 5 with the autocannon, because then you have damage reduction when you're at full fire with the autocannon, and you have more damage reduction when you're standing close to Molly. It's best for classes that don't move around a whole lot. It can be good on Scout, but usually you're going to use your higher mobility just to get away from bad situations. However, it's not bad to go hang out by Molly every once in a while. It can be really good with Engineer because you set up your turrets. You can just blast everything and, you'll get the damage reduction if enemies do get close to you. It's also really good with Gunner since you can take reduced damage, like I said, with the autocannon or just by itself. You're likely not moving around a whole lot as Gunner, and you also have your shield, so you have another way to keep safe. I think I'm going to put this into like high B tier. You could say like it's A tier, and I could understand that with like Engineer or Gunner. Maybe not so much with Scout. It's always going to be the weakest on Scout. And maybe not as much on Driller, but I could see that being argued as strong on Driller too. And then on like the low oxygen missions, you could argue that this one's probably S tier, and I would believe you, because you get a lot of value then. So I think this is where I'd put all the perks as of right now in the updated 2022 list. With the new primaries, there was a couple of these that I've changed my opinion on, and a couple of them that did kind of get stronger, usually in specific builds, not really by themselves because they haven't been buffed or nerfed or anything like that. But I've been asked a couple of times to do a more up-to-date list on these and my opinions of them. So I think this is where I would put them. I'm pretty happy with the list right now. Looking at it, maybe I'd move Resupplier up. Maybe I'll put Resupplier up there. Resupplier is just such a good value for the health. The reload is nice, and the faster taking is just kind of handy to have because it makes it so you're not sitting at the resupply pods as long as you would be. And it's good if you don't want to run breathing time on there. I think the rest are fine where they are. I could see Veteran Depositor being argued up into A tier though. I really could. Or Deep Pockets argued really anywhere. Tell me your thoughts down in the comments below. I'd really like to hear them. What are your favorite active and passive perks, and maybe what class that you play them the most with? Some of these perks, like I said, can be really strong on certain classes, like Vampires, certainly S tier on Driller, on everybody else, maybe not. And I will likely be doing this later again this year when the new secondaries come out, because they might get changed, as well as, who knows, in the next chapter or the chapter after that. Some of these might get reworked, or maybe, like I said, combined into other ones. Ghost Ship does tend to balance more on what's popular, so I would like to see some of these less popular perks getting buffed. I think that'd be really cool. So special thanks to the supporters of this channel. These are my members over here on YouTube and my patrons over on Patreon. They get early access to videos like this. If you would like to be a part of that, you can. There are links down in the description. Thanks again. Remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye!